Hey Paul, couple of thoughts. Saw your emails. You had a couple questions there. One of them was P3 alignments, I think, and P6 alignments. Kind of depends on what you mean as far as those. There's some, again, P6 and one thing to realize about when you start talking about the sections or the positions of the swing, what's great about the P system is this is how you communicate to other guys in terms of what part of the swing you're talking about. So if you say, hey, I'm doing this at P3, or, anyone that knows anything about it knows what you're talking about. They know that you mean, for P3, they know you mean roughly left arm parallel on the backswing. It's much easier, especially when you're writing emails to guys who are talking about the swing, or even when you're just, verbally talking about the swing. P3, P4, P5, those are useful reference points that allows you to streamline the speech when you articulate it, so that you can just kind of just simplifies things, basically. People know exactly what you mean, exactly what you're talking about. It's better, it's less cumbersome than saying, well, when left arm parallel on the backswing, or second time shaft is parallel on the downswing for P6. I mean, it's just easier to say P6. So then, okay, where do you want to be at those points? Well, it depends on what swing theory you're talking about. I mean, Morad's going to have a protocol that gives you kind of some pretty rigid ideas about where the arm alignment should be, where the shaft alignment should be, in relation to, like, vertically the face-on view, in relation to the clock face, in relation to your plane line, in relation to how shallow or deep you're talking in the depth of the swing, working on this axis. So, it's almost like you're asking me, where I think they should be, and that's a complicated question, because it kind of depends on who I'm watching at golf balls and what I'm trying to get them to do. Where I actually want them to get at the varying reference points throughout the swing, but also what I want them to feel like they're trying to do. And sometimes it's more useful to have a feel in your mind that's really an exaggerated thing. For like a perfect example would be, I hope we can see this, but if someone's like this coming into P6, they've unloaded the angle too early and they're starting to throw it away and they're starting to stand up out of it and getting early extension and all this kind of stuff, then you would tell them to try to get P6 to where the shaft is still parallel to the ground and the hands are in front of the left thigh, which you're not going to get there. I mean, nor should you get there, but that would be what the guy would be trying to feel. So there's that part too. What do you feel like you're trying to do? Where do you actually want it to show up when you get done kind of implementing that feel? And when you're talking about alignments, are you talking about face-on alignments? Are you talking about down the line alignments? Are you talking about the pitch of the shaft? Are you talking about how much angle you have between the left arm and the shaft? So, well, we need more specificity there before I would start saying, here's where I like to see it. And then I could probably expand on it further. Some of the other stuff you were asking about elbows. Thoughts about the elbows. I would say there's some of this stuff, there's some freedom for personal expression, so there's some freedom for personal idiosyncrasy. And then there's some things that you really shouldn't do that we don't see any good players do. So, you'll get, as you watch the club go to the top of the swing, you're going to see really good ball strikers that have a little bit of a high elbow, and then it starts to settle back in, and you'll see guys that have the elbow pointing a little bit more down. As you know, I like to reference other athletic motions, throwing the medicine ball or throwing a baseball. I will say, as the elbow goes back, you can bring in it a little bit earlier on the backswing, or you can let it float a little bit and then come back, and then kind of let the elbow fold back in during your transition. See great ball strikers do both of those types of things. That guy. It's kind of noisy. So, you know, if you were going to watch someone throw a baseball or throw any type of ball, any type of object, you know, you might see a guy, he kind of start to load into his right side here with a little bit more of a floaty elbow going back. You know, from the face-on view, he would kind of look like this, and then come back into it, and then kind of pull the slack out of it and create the stretch, and then kind of that stretch shorten cycle, and then start to generate the rotation and start to push the elbow out and release all the energy back to the outside of the circle. But you can, I mean, this is very valid here, right? To create a little bit of a float away, and then start to gather it back up and pull the slack out of the system and create that stretch across the entire system before you start generating rotation, and then stalling the rotation to push the energy out to the outside of the circle. So how much you do this, right? So would it be like this, or would it be like this, or would it be like that? You will see varying amounts of that with good ball strikers, but I think what you don't want to do, so here's would be like a big no-no, would be to arbitrarily start to get the right elbow tucked in a little too soon. So with early Morad, like Model 1, you know, where Mac liked to see P2, he would like to see that elbow come in. Yeah, you can bring it in immediately, but the error that you can make doing that, if you kind of tuck the elbow in a little too much and you actually start to shrink that radius a little bit too soon, and then the left arm starts to get a little disconnected and the shaft starts to get flattened behind you, I mean, that's a really hard spot to recover from if you're looking at the natural dynamics that good ball strikers make when they swing the club. So you'd probably rather see it, you know, if you're going to go to one side of the spectrum or the other, you'd rather see a little bit too much of this, you know, a little bit of this, and then set the angle and go, as opposed to someone getting this elbow tucked in. So again, back to the analogy, you're just not going to see anyone naturally take something and throw it and like tuck the arm in like this and try to push it out. That just doesn't work. That's just not the dynamics of how human beings generate rotation when they're playing sports. That's just not how you kind of, it's not how you have this big centralized rotating body, and then you have some arm of some type trying to use that angular velocity and transmit it to the outside of the circle so you can release it into whatever that object is. Whether you were throwing a punch, or whether you were throwing a baseball, or whether you're swinging a tennis racket, or whatever it is, you wouldn't see this kind of arbitrary, you know, kind of tuck the elbow in going back. So you can keep the elbow in if you do it just right, but if you overdo it or get it wrong, it's not going to work at all. So, you know, that's something to consider. I wouldn't necessarily mean that you need to start flying the elbow. But, you know, when you're working with other guys or working with your students, or you're looking at the dynamics of the swing, you're more likely to make a bigger mistake getting it tucked in too soon. Getting it tucked in too soon is going to kind of retard the sequence going back. It's going to make it really hard to make a good transition into the downswing. It just makes it more complicated than it needs to be, and the game's already like super complicated. So let's leave it as complicated as it already is. Let's not further the complication. Do I want to see like super floaty, way high, you know, elbow past parallel to the spine, past parallel to the spine, and then try to come back into it? I don't necessarily want to see that either. I mean, there can be some pretty wicked plane shifting with the shaft when you do that, so that probably overcomplicates things. But if you did it like that, and you had a decent transition at all with the pivot, you can put the shaft right on the numbers, perfect coming down, if you do it that way and generate speed and have the right sequence. Everything's gonna be happening in the right order. That can still happen. But tucking early and folding in soon and shortening the radius, that's just it will be hard to make that work very well. The other thing too to consider is what are the arms and the elbows doing? I mean, the arms and the elbows are working on a little bit more of a vertical plane than the shoulders, right? So everything gets progressively more vertical through the assembly. Ankles, knees, pelvis, shoulders, arms. Everything is basically going to be becoming increasingly steep, so that ultimately you can swing the shaft on plane toward the ball, right? Because you stand next to the ball and the ball's on the ground. So as you rotate, all these joints have to have a progressively steeper number just to get the shaft to the right plane by the time you get to upstairs to the upper assembly of your golf swing, so to speak. So because of that, each of these segments is going to have kind of a different circle to look at, and it's going to be a little bit less, it's not just going to be as simple as taking the golf club and rotating around the circle up here and then just, putting some pelvic tilt and a little bit of bend in your lumbar spine, and then all of a sudden, and a little bit in your thoracic, and then all of a sudden, you just make kind of you can just tilt the hula hoop wheel over, so to speak, or the Ferris wheel over. Basically, because of the way the arms work, not only is the plane steeper, but the radius of the club looks a little bit more like an ellipse, right? It doesn't look like a circle. Like the shoulders are going to look a little more like a circle. So you've got steeper and you've got wider. It looks almost like an egg, right? It kind of goes out wide, and then kind of as it comes in and starts down, it's a little bit more narrow and then wide. So it's kind of wide to narrow to wide, but it looks a little bit like an egg, like an ellipse. So because of that, what you end up doing is as the arms and the hands come down, the elbows are trying to coordinate their relationship with the pivot to try to use to try to swing the handle and the shaft through impact the right way. What you get at the bottom is you get, the shaft kind of advancing forward, right? So instead of being a perfect circle like this, you've got, a little pelvic shift. The shoulders are starting to work in a little bit of a circle, but the hands are following more of an elliptical pattern, and so you have a little bit more of an advancement forward of the hands as they come through impact. So the arc of the hands is going to typically feel like it looks, or at least feels, a little bit more flat through impact. Certainly as the right arm starts to straighten and the radius is getting wider, as the shoulders are pivoting up and out, the hands are still going kind of more level and more forward. So because of that, you can't just sit there and use the left arm connection point as an example and just like have the shoulder pull the left arm. What ends up really happening is that, you go back, maybe you have a little bit of width going back, right elbow, maybe it's up a little bit, maybe it's down a little bit, but it's holding back as you start down. And as the pivot starts to transition, it is definitely the left shoulder pulling the left arm and basically pulling the arm assembly. Okay? It's really the stretch across, from the shoulder through the arm, through the handle, and into the shaft. But at some point fairly soon in the downswing, probably P5 to P6, what then happens is the shoulders kind of going up and out, and the hands still have to go down and forward, and they have to keep moving forward and then up and out. Even though the lowest point is out at P6 and then going up and left to P8, it's still got more of this kind of what feels like a little bit more of a horizontal travel. As the left shoulder is coming more vertical and up and out, the hands are going to feel like they have a little bit more of that kind of arc. So because of that, you can't just have the shoulder pull the arm, shoulder pull the arm, shoulder pull the arm, shoulder pull the arm, because the shoulder's trying to go up and left, and you can't just pull it around. You can't, the arms and the hands, basically all the energy is being thrown through the arms and the hands, and they're traveling a little bit more down, a little more out toward the target. So shoulders pulling, shoulders pulling, shoulders pulling, shoulders pulling, and then from here, the shoulder's not really going to pull much anymore. It's going to pull a little bit, but for the most part now, it's actually the right arm that's going to pull the club. The right arm is going to keep pulling the club, down the plane toward the target. And then at some point, as both arms straighten, both the arms are then going to start to tie back into what the shoulders are doing. As both arms get straight, now, coming, from this angle maybe, coming through impact, right? The right arm is straightening, and now that both arms are straight, now that's almost kind of linking back up to the shoulders again. You know, and you can see that with some players where it almost looks like the arm is off and then it comes back, right, to the chest. It's not like, unless some guy gets max super open with a kind of an interesting looking pivot, the left arm, it's going to be hard to kind of keep the left arm on the chest and keep the shoulder pulling the left arm. It's really more like it pulls the left arm, and right in here now all of a sudden the right forearm, the right wrist, and the right arm straightening is actually now, you know, applying the forces to the shaft. And it's not just pulling. I mean, if you talk to guys a lot smarter than me about the actual forces and torques in the golf club, there's all kinds of things happening, being applied through the hands, from the hands and through the hands. But it's not just left shoulders. So it's not just the left shoulder pulling the left arm all the way through with the right arm assisting. I mean, I think the right arm is actually doing a lot of the work down at the bottom through impact. And to me, that's kind of what like a guy like Hogan looks like. A guy like Hogan looks like tons of left arm pull, and at the bottom it looks like right arm is really driving the shaft through impact. I mean, Hogan would look like kind of like this for the ball, right? And that would not be really the shoulder pulling the arm that much. That would be almost, you know, what's creating that gap is that the right forearm and the right wrist look like it's still applying a lot of forces to the golf club. It doesn't mean it's necessarily a drag the handle force, but it's definitely probably, you know, somewhat more in charge than the left hand, I would think, in what it's doing. It's kind of maybe driving the handle and the shaft and the head a little bit more. So, you know, because of that, what you're trying to do with the hands and the arms and the elbow is you're trying to get it so that you can make that sequence, and you're trying to make the club work through some kind of position, some kind of dynamics in 3D space to make the club come down. It falls back a little bit, handle goes out, starts to steepen down to P6. At P6, it's the lowest outward point. Now the handle's going to go up and to the left a little bit as the club is being thrown out, pretty much aggressively as you can get the club to throw out. But the right arm, I think, to me, is probably what's controlling that assembly through impact, you know, or at least, you know, through impact and maybe a little beyond. I mean, what you'll see in my swing is I'm one of those typical guys that you can see my hand kind of lets go of it. So, you know, maybe it's just past impact or whatever, but certainly from P6 to P7, it might very well be that the right arm's doing a little bit more work than the left arm. So when you start to look at that, it's like, okay, so what's applying the force of the golf club at what point in the swing? And that starts to determine kind of how the elbows and the hands are going to work, and what you want to do with the elbows, and the relationship between, you know, the elbows and the forearms and the hands and the upper arms and the pivot. But I will say this, I mean, if you get the pivot right, it's kind of hard to mess the arms up. But you can have a shitty pivot, like a bad pivot, and you can have pretty good arm work, and you're not going to be any good, right? So it's, you know, get the foundation of the pivot right, and then kind of fine tune what the arms are doing in relation to the pivot, kind of get those in sync together and stuff. But, you know, how you're moving the big parts of your body is really the foundation of your swing. And everything is so much easier, you know. Again, I always go back to me because I know my swing best. I mean, I'm looking at you guys on video and stuff like that, but you guys are going to know your swings better than I am. But I know what I do, for sure. And for me, you know, part of what this thing that happens is my sequencing of my pivot, and my elbow gets behind, not necessarily because my elbow itself it decides it wants to get behind. It's because the way my pivot works and at what pace it works. So instead of trying to keep a big differential, which I have plenty of differential between my hips and shoulders coming down, what I need to do is actually feel like my hips kind of stay in the same spot, waist till the club gets to the top, and then I need to feel like I actually get my chest to take the differential between my shoulders and my hips and shrink that down. I feel like I'm trying to get the shoulders to almost try to race forward to shrink the gap between the hips and the shoulders. Because if I do that, now my arm actually moves the right direction. Based on what I'm trying to do, it doesn't like get behind me, it actually starts to move out in the right spot. Shallows the shaft in the right place. And you can see very distinctly with Hogan, that's what he's doing, is he makes that lateral shift with the pelvis. You can see this, that's what they call it, the Hogan elbow move, right? It looks like he's doing it with his elbow, but he's really actually just falling back down to his ankles. and as he falls back into his angles, his chest is kind of almost like advancing on the hips a little bit, right? He doesn't stay like this. What he does is it looks like he kind of stays stacked and then almost shrinks the angle between the shoulders and the hips, and then from there you still got a little bit of a differential, and then from there he just explodes on the left. Once he gets the pelvis left enough, then he just starts rotating and raising through the ball. But you can see even on little shots, even on little pitch shots or little half wedges, you can see this move, and it's not the elbow by itself. It's the shoulder. It's actually the shoulders looking like it settles down toward the belly button. And when the shoulders do that, that will bring the arm assembly and make the arm assembly look like the elbow's coming into the stomach a little bit. So that's when you get this kind of motion happening. Which, it's probably a little overrated for guys to chase that position, and there's different ways that guys have tried to do it. Some guys tilt the shoulders back too much trying to do it. Some guys just jam the elbow in. Some guys start like tucking it in really low, trying to keep it really low before they even get to transition. I don't think it's not really any of that. It's really more of the pivot being good and the arms responding to the pivot the right way. So again, the story is make your pivot good, and then it's pretty easy to do the arms right. But no matter how well you do your arms, if your pivot's not good, if the foundation of the rotation, the way the big parts of your swing move, having the right blend of lateral and rotational, staying in your postural angles, and then getting the right rotation and pelvic release at the right time with the right amount of aggression and the right sequencing, I mean, that's the golf swing, but it's the hardest thing to do. Seems like pretty simple motions, you know, big muscles working a certain way. Most of us can set up here, you know, in our pivot angles and go, yeah, I want to load into my right leg, I want to push off the right leg, get a little lateral shift with the pelvis. It's falling back down on my angles, start to rotate up and out. That seems pretty simple, but it's not simple. It's hard to do with a club and a golf ball. But if you can get the pivot right, and that's primarily what you're trying to do, is you're trying to get the pivot right. If you get the pivot right, the arm stuff is going to be pretty easy. I mean, it's really easy to get the arms right once the pivot's right. And you already, I mean, it looks like you have a good sense of the way the arm should move anyway. I mean, you playing the shaft with your arms, like if we just like remove, cut and pasted what your arms and the shaft are doing when you change direction, it's really nice. It's just you get real pitchy with your torso, and you get your sequence a little bit out of whack, and then you stall early. You get the shaft is planed incorrectly coming into P6, not because the arms are doing something wrong, but because the pivot is out of position. It's out of sequence, out of position. It's starting too fast and stalling. It needs to wait, stay in your angles, and then explode much faster, much later, and continue much longer. So that's what you should do. So I like chatting about, you know, the different idiosyncrasies of the golf swing, but you know, as it applies to you, what do you need to do? You need to do a bunch of hard work on your pivot. And then, based on what it looks like your instincts are to do with your arms, I mean, it should fall into place pretty good. But the pivot is going to take a long time. It's going to be really hard. It's going to be a massive bitch to do it right. But you know, that's golf, man. What else did you ask me? Oh, draws and fades. Again, the ability to draw and fade the ball is really overrated. It's not hard to do. It's with the caveat that if you're playing a tournament and you're under pressure and your stock shot's a little cut, and then you decide you're going to play like a little start right draw or a little high draw or change trajectory and change curve away from your stock shot under pressure the first time, one time only, that's hard. Like if you look at most of the tour guys I work with, they can play dial shot on the range, no problem. They can hit any shot you want them to hit. It might take them 2 swings instead of 1 to hit the opposite shot of their standard shot. Perfect, like I'm going to fade this thing 15 feet, and it fades 30 feet, and they go, I'm a guy that draws the ball, right? And he cuts it, and goes, oh, hold on, and he goes, there it is, right? Yeah, number 2, it doesn't count on the golf course, that's no good, right? So even the guys on tour, unless they're superstars, some of the superstars probably can do it, but even a journeyman guy on the PGA Tour, he's going to go to a stock shot unless he's forced to do it differently. You know, slide it around a tree, he's got a real bad crosswind. He's got maybe a shorter club. It's easier to command the amount of cut or draw he wants, and maybe he'll get a little sexy with it. A little punchy 3/4 8 cut to a right pin. Yeah, maybe, but he's not going to do anything sexy with a 4-iron probably, unless the course and the conditions are demanding that you do something different. It's even hard for the best players to hit a shot that is not their stock shot exactly the right way. Now on the range, again, they can hit any shot you want. It may take them one or two swings to make the perfect amount of curve, the perfect trajectory they want, but yeah, they can do it. But the mechanics of it, it's not hard, really. I mean, what you're going to do is once you have the foundation, then you're basically shifting the plane line and shifting the face angle. Now, how that applies to the biomechanics, like if you're going to play a draw, then what you're going to do is you're probably going to set your body angles to the right, not just your feet. That's a bad idea. Just your feet is what guys make a mistake trying to hit a draw. It's got to be your shoulder alignments, maybe a little bit your hip alignments. Get the thighs maybe pointed to the right just a little bit. You probably can't see this, but get the thighs to the right a little bit, get the chest down to the right a little bit, get the shoulder alignment to the right a little bit. As you get to the top, what you'll do is you come down, you're going to stall the shoulders a little bit early, right? So you're going to start to actually tilt your shoulders before they get a certain amount open. So instead of your normal thing would have been here and then starting to have a little bit more tilt. What you're going to end up doing is you're going to actually probably have the pelvis go a little bit from in to out, almost like that kind of, I think you called it, I don't know what you called it, like it's one of your golf swing moves that you've tried before where you feel like the hip's going to go out from under you a little bit. It's basically an early release of the pelvis. And an early release of the pelvis, which would mean your pelvis or tailbone goes out toward the ball a little bit and you go into a shoulder tilt a little bit early, and that kind of keeps the shoulder a little bit more, the shoulder rotation a little bit more retarded, and that keeps the plane line pointed to the right, and then it's just a matter of how much face rotation you put on it to produce the curve. And then there's a couple different variations there. But you basically feel like the right shoulder stays down as the hips come out from under you a little bit, the right shoulder stays down. That shifts the path to the right. And then you can either, one thing can happen, you can do nothing, because just keeping the shoulders closed will tend to get the face starting to close more early in relation to the path. So just stopping the right shoulder or slowing the right shoulder down, that tends to get the face rotating, so that'll probably produce some of it. You can take a stronger grip as you do the same thing. So as you rotate the forearms to square, because there is some forearm rotation down there at the bottom. As you get the forearms rotated with a stronger grip, face can be more closed. You can take a strong grip and then flatten that wrist out quite a bit, which shuts the face down even more. It just depends on, how much you want to start to the right, how much you want to hook it, what club you have. Obviously, when you start with loft, you can reduce the loft quite a bit. So high lofted clubs are easy to hook a lot, low lofted clubs are not. Opposite is true for a fade. Cut shot's going to be the opposite, right? Cut shot's going to feel like the right shoulder goes out more. If the right shoulder continues rotating, it's going to shift the plane to the left a little bit. And as you come through impact, you're going to feel like the face stays more open because you've shifted the plane to the left. And that means instead of stalling the right shoulder is going to continue to keep moving, right? So that you get the plane, the club, instead of dropping down this way, will look a little bit more out this way. This is in some ways related to what Mac talks about with his, the CF release, which is basically shoulders or the body stays closed and then the arms keep going and the arms get thrown off to the right creates a plane line to the right. That would be kind of the CF, centrifugal release, what he likes to call it. And then his CP move, where he's trying to get the handle low and left, he's going to obviously move out this much further this way at P5, continue the shoulders rotating. And the shoulders will look typically like they have a little bit less differential when you hit the cut. That's what I'm kind of almost trying to do with my normal swing and try to get my elbow to plane the shaft properly. You would feel like the chest stays on top of the ball a little bit more and chases the hips around to the left. Right shoulder would feel like it stays a little bit higher, spine from the face on would look a little bit more vertical. And you'd almost feel like you close the gap with the shoulders. The shoulders are almost taking over a little bit early. And then the draw is going to feel like a little more slidey, pelvis out from under you a little bit more. A little more, slidey is not the right word, but tilty. A little bit more tilty with the chest. Another thing, and then how much face angle you want, which would be weaker grip, more cup at the top. You can play around with the timing of the release, retarding the forearm rotation through impact. The best way to hit a cut is to hit a cut without kind of without kind of wiping the thing, is actually to do kind of the karate chop, where you straighten the right arm out really aggressively, but you do it in a way that feels like you're going to cut a board in half with the back of your hand. Then you can really release the right arm really aggressively, but the facing stays open, so you can hit that kind of power slider to the right. If you want to hit the ball consistently solid, making these variations, because the arc is in a semicircle in front of your feet and you're shifting the plane to the right, you're probably a better chance of making clean contact if you move the ball back when you're trying to hit a draw, all things being equal. Move the ball a little bit forward on the arc, closer to your left foot, or more left in relation to your kind of low point in your swing, or compared to your armpit, is probably a better way to put it. And then trajectory, right? So if you're going to hit a high cut, you know, ball's forward quite a bit, and then it gets a little more complicated where you can start to like, if you hit a high cut, you can basically start to like get in these typical kind of that CP position where the right shoulder goes out, plane line shifts to the left, and then from there you can stall a little bit and stay behind it, and then throw a little bit more dynamic lofty of impact. I feel like the club is staying open, but it's almost giving a little swing to the ball for the high cut. It depends on what club you're trying to hit, you know, and what trajectory you want. Low draws, high drops, you're going to even get a little more tilt. You have to move the ball a little more forward, but now you have to chase it forward a little bit with the low point of the swing. So you have to get a little bit more slidey with a little more tilt, and then time the face rotation. But you know, once you get the foundation of the pivot and the arms working right, like playing with those different, you know, those different shoulder and hip separation, shoulder and hip alignments, how much you want to accelerate the rotation of the shoulders, you know, basically what your pivot alignments are and your arm alignments are. I mean, that's not that difficult to do. What's hard is creating the foundation in the first place that allows you to have a good pivot to begin with. I mean, that's the hard part. So, you know, the interesting thing about building the foundation of a good golf swing is as you become a little bit more aware of what your body's trying to do, as you kind of build the foundation of the core elements of your swing, by the time you decide to start shaking it up a little bit and hitting little cuts and draws and stuff, you're so familiar with where everything is that then to adjust everything in relation to each other, all the different pieces in relation to each other with the mechanics of it to generate the different flights, is actually pretty easy. It's not like it gets harder and harder. It actually gets easier. Once you have a good foundation, everything gets easier. And the foundation is the pivot, and then you fine-tune the arms. You know, and that includes the geometry of the sequence. You get that stuff going, and the other stuff is pretty much cake. But getting the pivot right, that's the hard part, and that's the main reason why even if someone's pretty athletic and pretty serious, they started golf in their 20s, and then as they retire, get a little older, they go, man, I'm going to take some lessons. I'm going to become a good golfer. I'm like a 4 handicap. I'm going to become a +2. I'm going to hit. Okay, you're going to be a +2 or +4? You want to be like super good? Oh, you got to rebuild your pivot from scratch because you just learned how to swing in your 20s, kind of slapping it with your arms, and you're athletic. And you got some hand-eye coordination, but you actually want to hit the ball like a really good ball striker. That's hard, man, because he never got the foundation of a good pivot. So the foundation, getting the hips to move right with the right sequencing, at the right speed, at the right time, man, that's man, it gets real in a heartbeat when you're trying that stuff and looking at it on tape and looking at your videos and trying to make that work. And then the arms are still hard, but easier if you got a good pivot, like we talked about. But rebuilding that, you know, when for your first 20 years of your golf or whatever, you haven't done that right, man, that's the hardest thing to do. You can change address alignments. You can do kind of the dump and twist that I talked about if you want to turn a slice into a hooker, but to create like a strong pivot that really allows you to swing the club down there good angles with everything in sync. You know, the body pivot and the arm swing working in perfect concert with each other and delivering really consistent angles down there with speed. That's a big enchilada right there. So can be done. That's what you're trying to do. That's what I'm trying to do. So we just keep swinging away at it. I'm chipping away at mine. I made a little progress today, so it's a little bit better. It's made a couple of micro improvements. Working on getting my transition, getting my tranny locked in. So it's coming along. I'm loving it. It's just like you are. It's a blast to grind away at it. I'm gonna keep grinding away at it, and hopefully you will too. So, I kind of rambled there. I got a little bit sideways on some stuff, but you know, that's what I do. So maybe you got something from it. Talk to you soon, and keep grinding.